All this is Dr. Mobeen Sayed from drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. And today with us, we have our own Paul Bork. Paul, welcome and let's start.
Thanks, V. So today,
Paul, welcome and let's start.
Thanks, V. So today,
So we have echo, I believe. I'm going to ask the audience. Audience, are you able to hear the echo or it is just between me and Paul?
I believe. I'm going to ask the audience. Audience, are you able to hear the echo or it is just between me and Paul? I'm going to ask the audience.
Paul, you may have to actually go off and then come back because I'm wearing a headphone. So on my side, it will not be.
Because I'm wearing a headphone, so on my side, it will not be.
Very good.
Because I'm wearing a headphone, so on my side, it will not be.
Very good.
So I'm going to stop my broadcast as well. The broadcast would actually continue. I'm just going to close my Chrome and then come back. Can you do that too? We'll actually come back to the same broadcast.
Close my Chrome and then come back. Can you do that too? We'll actually come back to the same broadcast. And then come back. Can you do that too?
Okay, so I am here. I hope you can hear me, and we'll have Paul with us soon. I'm going to send him the link anyways once more. Okay, so Paul is here. This is here. So let's see if there is echo again or not.
Paul is here.
There is echo.
Let's see
I'm
if
going to mute myself.
there is echo again or not. Let's see if there is echo again.
Paul, you may have to mute yourself. I'll mute myself. And when the echo dies down, then you start and I will keep myself muted.
All right, very well. Hopefully we are done with the echoes for tonight. Very well. Hopefully we are done with the echoes for tonight. Apparently not. If I turn my speakers off so I don't hear anything, is the echo gone? Very good. Well, I'm going to have to glance over and see you occasionally because I can't hear anything here. So anyway, I apologize for that. That's the first time we've had that issue. So I'm going to talk a little bit about polio that a lot of people are getting excited about. And it also has some very strong parallels that I wasn't with COVID that I wasn't aware of until I started looking at the polio situation that's going on. So going to the next slide, I know it's a little busy, but I'm trying to put all the stuff here so you can see it as I talk through. There we go. I think the polio, it's interesting. Polio itself is terrifying. It's a horrible disease, but with what's going on right now in the US and the UK and Israel, and most of the places around the world, I don't think it's concerning. And I'll talk about that. I put down here the sources for the stuff that I have. And so the US has one case of what they call CVD-PV2, which is circulating vaccine-derived polio virus type 2. What's happened is they have two different broad categories of polio vaccines. One uses a weakened virus and one uses a dead virus. The weakened virus is cheaper, easier to store, and it's the one that the U.S. started with. We stopped doing it, and some places in the world are still using it. Israel, for example, uses some of both. They've stopped using the live virus or the weakened virus now. And so when someone is given the weakened virus, there is a chance, and given that if millions of doses are given, there is a real probability that some people will get sick from the virus that is given from the vaccine, but it's not nearly as severe as polio, and it's easier to contain. And so that's what they're doing. That's what we have here. So this is a case that came from outside the United States, from someone probably from Nigeria that got a vaccine, and the vaccine did what it was supposed to, but rather than just have the spike proteins, it had a complete virus, but a weakened virus. And apparently they came to the US and they gave the person that got the vaccine isn't the person that had the case, and so they're circulating. That's what the C is for. So there is circulating disease that is derived from the polio vaccine, and it's type 2. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. They also found it in the wastewater, and they found in the wastewater in the UK and Israel also has a case. But given that how sensitive the tests are, finding it in the wastewater simply means that someone who had the vaccine is in the US. And we have folks coming back and forth from various countries that are using the vaccine. And so finding it in the wastewater is not terribly concerning. It's interesting that in the US, there's only 2 counties that have found the polio vaccine in the wastewater. They're adjacent, and it's right next to where the case was. Now, it turns out that polio mutates at a very high rate, one of the highest rates of any vaccine. And so they're able to see that it isn't the exact same structure as what the vaccine is. And so they can say it has been circulating for a while in the county. And it was the New York State Department of Health that sequenced it, and the CDC confirmed it. And so it's an infection from the polio Sabin type 2 virus. Okay, and so the transmission chain was from an individual who received an oral polio vaccine, which is abbreviated OPV, and it's no longer authorized in the US, and we've only been using the inactivated polio vaccine since the year 2000. All right, and Israel found it, and I said Israel was using the oral polio vaccine, but was for a different type of the virus. Just like we have Alpha, Delta, and Omicron in the US, there's 3 different types of polio, each essentially 3 separate infections that run together. And there tends not to be very much immunity from one to the other, so they really have a trivalent vaccine. And so some of the oral polio will have different of the types of polio in there. Everything going well? Okay. And in Nigeria, for the virus-developed polio for type 2, had 33 cases last year that were found. And the year before that, they had 415. So it just gives a rough number of what's going on. So if we think of this as the vaccine being the exposure route rather than from an animal or other folks, it's not nearly as spreading as polio would be, or measles, or even the coronaviruses, but there are a fair number of cases. So having someone come over and get one is not all that surprising. And we've had periodic cases since the U.S. stopped using the oral polio vaccine. Now, to give you an idea of the what's going on with the real, the wild type of polio, in Afghanistan, they had 56 children were paralyzed in the wild. And 4 in 2021, the amount of vaccination went down and the number of children paralyzed has gone up. This disease primarily strikes children. Very few people actually get paralyzed, and so most adults have been exposed to it, and that's why it tends to affect children most of the time. And Afghanistan and Pakistan are the two countries that have the wild type of polio still going around. And Pakistan has reported year-to-date 14 cases. In 2021, they only had one case. So the numbers are going up substantially on a percentage basis, but still fairly low. And the World Health Organization is hoping to get their hands around it and eradicate it in those two countries as well. Now, talk about what is polio. Folks a lot older than I am know what it was because it was really ravaging the world, and it was something of real concern. But it's a viral disease, and it causes muscle weakness, and it attacks through the mouth. And it's through the oral fecal exposure primarily. Very rare respiratory and oral transmission. So if you're really worried about it or in an area where this is going around, washing your hands is probably a really good idea, particularly after potential exposure for that route. It's considered a very contagious disease, and it spreads pre-symptomatically up to 30 days before any symptoms show up. And for the most people, it's fatigue, fever, headache, stiffness, muscle pain, vomiting, as they say, mostly mild and flu-like. Now, as you remember when we started talking about this, from the medical community, mild simply means that you didn't go to the ER or you didn't go to the hospital. It doesn't mean you didn't suffer. Because the mild versus the severe cases are usually categorized in a way in terms of how much medical resources they consume. And rarely, but significant cases of paralysis and death from paralysis. And the death usually comes from paralysis of the muscles that for breathing. And then in 1955, they got the vaccine, and it was eradicated in 1979. And if you look at the number of cases of paralysis where people were, from 15,000 in the 1950s, in the 1960s it was 100, and 1970s it was 10, and then it was gone. And you can see that this gives great hope to Pakistan and Afghanistan that they are right where the U.S. was a decade or 2 decades before it was completely eradicated from our countries. And all U.S. states require children to receive polio vaccinations before elementary school and childcare. And if we continue to vaccinate all the children, then all the adolescents and young adults and old adults will have polio vaccine. I think you're right. There's a fair number of cases are viewed as asymptomatic, but that wasn't known as well when the disease was coming through. And we had a case in the U.S. in 2013, which was another imported infection. And so again, this is something that we've had before and we've dealt with without major health problems across the country, and I think that will happen again. Here's a slide showing you the reported paralysis cases, and you can see it jumped up right here in the 50s from a fairly low level. And here, this is 57,000 cases. And keep in mind, the U.S. population was roughly half the size it is today back then. So this would be the psychological impact of having 100,000, mostly children, paralyzed. Terrible, terrible disease. And here is a picture of one of the wards. And this is before they had respirators where they made an iron lung. They were patented to deal with this particular issue. There were patent fights over who could get money and who couldn't get money. And some of them are smaller for the little infants and some of them are bigger for the children. And just a horrible thing. And that the children were in it sometimes for months, and sometimes it was a life sentence to be in the iron lung. Taking a look at the World Health Organization on this site, they say a 94% vaccination rate is required for herd immunity. If it's lower than that, then the disease spreads. Okay, and it's one of the fastest mutating viruses, according to the site. There's 3 wild types. They with a great deal of imagination, called them wild poliovirus 1, wild poliovirus 2, and wild poliovirus 3. And they all have caused irreversible paralysis and death. And they're genetically different, just like we have not had separate diseases with the coronavirus, the SARS coronavirus 2, but the polio has separated into 3 separate diseases. And the world has claimed that the wild poliovirus 3 was eradicated in 2019, wild poliovirus 2 in 2015, and so there's only the wild poliovirus 1 that's circulating now. And so right now, most of the polio that we see is cases of this either circulating or it's from the vaccine-derived poliovirus. And protecting the children from another outbreak, and you do it, there are going to be a number of people that get sick from the weakened poliovirus vaccine. Here's a map with the countries of the world that are considered having polio. These 2 countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan, have the wild type of poliovirus 1. The rest of the countries' vaccination have gotten rid of the polio wild recently, and they simply have the much less dangerous polio virus from the weakened vaccine. Make sense? Any questions about that? I sure can't. Yes, I believe that it can be treated, but most of the time it presents when someone is paralyzed. A lot of the cases are asymptomatic. You stop giving the vaccine after. No, the U.S. still requires all the children going to school. Every state requires a child going to school or to daycare. Young children are required to have the polio vaccine. Yeah, that's why the U.S. uses the dead vaccine, but it's more expensive. Some countries are viewing that it is, and I guess the storage requirements are lesser for the weakened virus than for the dead virus. But yeah, the oral is the weakened virus, the live virus. Yes. Oh, looking at 2 wrenches. One is better than the other. I wonder which is which. Okay, now jumping on to SARS, unless there's another question about polio. Okay. Weakened vaccine is the oral one, yes. And you can look at the sites that I have listed here, and everything I know and say from those sites, and if they're right, they're right, and if they're wrong, they're wrong, and I have no great expertise. I've just spent time reading and reporting what I've read. There's just a second, let me go back. There's this site right here, ourworldindata.org. Polio has a very nice description of an extensive description of how it went forward, how the money was raised for it, how people responded. Some people saying patent, there is no patent, it belongs to the world, and other people fighting over various aspects. And so you can read that. It's just a couple of pages, but I didn't want to go through all of it, but did want to point out ourworldindata.org/polio has a very nice description of that if you want to learn a little more about it. Yes, it can cause paralysis, yes. Most of the people that get paralyzed do recover, and a lot of the children were put in the iron lungs, and they were there for a period of time to recover. This is an amazing parallel to what history repeating itself, but I didn't learn about the history until just preparing for this talk. But this is a lot like the long COVID. And they found that the people who had weakened lungs or weakened muscles and couldn't breathe, but if they put them in an iron lung and got them past the month, 2 months, 6 months, a year, where their muscles were weakened, they could learn to breathe and get out of the iron lung and go around. And I imagine the long COVID will have a fairly parallel thing, that whatever the disease tends to cause, the long sequela does the same thing. And if we have people suffer but get them through that, their bodies will recover, and we may be able to help them and bring people back. And so anyway, I did want to point out that article if you want to see a little more and get a little more flavor about what was going on at the time and what happened. And back to our post wrenches. I'm not going to weigh in on which wrench is which. You can all make your own decision on that. And even the slide that I saw asked the question, best wrench. It doesn't say the one that, I guess maybe they're getting two different salaries of appreciation or something. I don't know. So back to our SARS-CoV-2. The CDC, given the additional money and the organizational change or whatever, they now have 3 weeks of forecast, or nowcast as they call it, rather than 2. So they've increased that 50%. And notice it covers a week. So even if the week was up to date, it would be the end date. So they're 3.5 days, they're half a week off. So now they're almost a month behind the real data. So when we look at this and someone says, oh my gosh, the numbers are here, the numbers are there, it'll be a month before we really know if that happened or not. And so we've with the CDC, we're confusing real data with fake data. I do, and I'm very happy, I put this yellow square around it, but they do mark it as a nowcast, and you can click to take it off the data. And so they are being very clear with what they're doing, but still it seems that they could do a little better. And now this is focused on the new one that's growing, which is the BA.4/6. Okay, and that's the little blue one here. They didn't put it at the bottom because they're putting it by numbers, not where it's of concern. And as you can see, they've got this number going up. We have the Nebraska area, which is leading the infection. And just like New York City brought in the BA.4, the BA.2, the BA.1, and the others, and so we have different areas of the country. And so when we're reflecting this, not only is it trying to reflect the whole country, but we have some very major changes. You can see, looking at the little graph on Texas that represents this whole area, and the one up here that represents area 7, that there's factor of 5 difference. And right over here, we've got a low number. In California, it's low. New York is higher, but so again, when we're trying to represent it, but let's take a close look at this. The question is, how is it growing and what is likely to occur? Nobody knows the future. I sure don't. But if we assume it keeps going the same way, which it's not going to, but if we assume that it does at the rate it is growing now against the BA.5, it's increasing about 13% per week, which means if it keeps growing at the same rate against BA.5, at this rate, it'll take about 30 weeks, 6 months and 2 weeks to completely replace BA.5. Now, when BA.4 will be replaced in about 3 months because it's growing faster against BA.4, and BA.4 is smaller. And when at the same level where BA.4/6 is right now, when BA.5 was at that place, it was growing at 75% per week rather than 13%. So the BA.4/6 is more transmissible than BA.5, but not so much better than BA.5. Than BA.5 was better than the BA.2/112, the existing ones when the BA.5 came in. And so the BA.4/6 should take over much more slowly. And so then the question is going to be, will the BA.5 sort of saturate itself and drop down in cases because it's reached the end of infecting everybody that's susceptible to it? And that's why one of the reasons why this assumption I had is I know it's not accurate, but it gives you an order of magnitude of what the rate is of growing. And if it keeps going, it'll be a long time before it takes over. And if BA5 suddenly collapses, the percentage may go way up, but the number of cases may be down. Does that all make sense? Good. We have this study right here. I think we may have talked about it on here. But again, the elevated risk of BA4 and 5 on breakthrough infections among previously infected or vaccinated officials was found. But the lower severity of the BA2 is persisting with BA4 and BA5. And we have we have no reason to suspect that this one that's called the BA4/6 will be any different than the BA4. I mean, it's a different variant, it's got different things, but there's no indication that it will not continue to have less severe effects for those that are infected. And I know there will be some people who die and some will be horribly hurt, but the percentages are going to be lower as it happens. And Tim Spector yesterday, the guy with the Zoe app, says that he seems to see more resurging COVID or reinfections inside a month or two of people getting it. He's getting that reported. He doesn't have numbers around it, but they're looking at it and he's not sure why, but apparently he's seen that. And it may be that they're getting the BA4/6 going into England, or it may be something else. I don't know. And so we take a look at his graph here. 111,000 new cases, which is 1,600 new cases per million. 1 in every 39 people in the UK is currently infected with BA5. BA5 now is only 85% of the new cases in the UK. If we jump back just a moment, 85, that's about where the data is for the US. They projected it to be going higher, a little higher here, but not quite getting over 90% for BA5. And again, we'll have the BA4 taking a little bit, but both of those will come down as the BA4/6 increases. So it looks like from that standpoint of the BA5 concentration infection rate for new cases, the US and the UK seem to be in phase right now. That has not always been the case, but it is right now. And I've got my little up and down arrows again, and the slopes of these are exactly the same. I'm putting them next to the curve so we can look at it. I mean, how is the BA4 and the BA2 and the BA4/5 infection curves going on? You can see that the infection curve for 2 was much faster, much higher. It was slowed down for the BA5. And if you look at the downward trend, cases dropped a lot faster initially. And here they came down at a much slower rate. And so they went up faster and came down slower. So there's a lot more people infected. Where here in this BA5 curve, it comes up slower and goes down faster. So we have a lot fewer people in the middle of the curve. But if you look at right now, the end of the slope coming down is pretty much the same as the end of the slope here. I mean, it's much longer, but it's coming down the same way. So whatever saturation or end of an infectious period is occurring, it looks like these last two slopes, the last two infections seem to have somewhat the same slope. And you notice it looks, here we have this double bump coming up, and we have a little bit of a double bump or whatever. I expect these cases, Tim Spector said it's going to stay low, and then in the fall, we're going to have it come up. I'm expecting it to come back up. Why? Just because it came back up here and it came back up there, and I only have 3 data points, but I think it's more reasonable to assume we get the same thing than that we get something completely different. And it may be that we get a reinfection with the BA5 if the BA4/6 doesn't come in, and this peak may be much lower and only get 50-30% of the people being reinfected over time. But I think it's to me, there's no data to assume that this curve is going to come down and stay low like it did way over here. Ever since Omicron first came in, we've had it bumping up. Whenever it comes down, it always takes off. We got 1, 2, 3, and I think this fourth one is going to come back up. How high it goes, I don't know. But noticed here we had infection rates of, it looks like 0 to me. And now we're talking about infection rates of 100,000. And notice another reason to be concerned. What is the R? It's at 1. If it stays 1, this will be just flat. And so that may be the reason that he's thinking, but we almost never have the R number stay where it is. It usually moves one way or another. And so it may be that it goes flat. And Tim Spector may be right. He certainly is a lot more educated about these things than I am. But looking at curves, I think that whatever caused this curve to go up and this curve is going to cause the current curve to come back up. So as time goes by, we'll find out if Tim Spector was right or if I was right. But we have different suggestions. As you notice what I just explained here, this curve is different than this curve. So something is different happening. And so it may well be that whatever happened here is not happening there. But I think it's more likely to be similar than it is to be dramatically different. Any questions? All right. Here are the top 20 symptoms. They have changed a fair amount recently, which is really strange because we're supposedly at the end of the infection and we've got 85% of the same BA5, but these numbers are shifting a fair amount. We take a look, so we have sore throat, headache has come up, back up to where it was. Blocked nose is higher, a cough with no phlegm, runny nose, a cough with phlegm. I don't know if these numbers are separate, but if you add them together, that put coughing right at the top, which is what they started with. And so again, I don't know what data is going into it, but it seems like we've got a cough, the runny nose, the sneezing, fatigue, and now we're down about 30% of the cases. So again, even headache, we have half the people not getting it. And the nose, the headache, and the cough seem to be about half the people. Then we're about a third for sneezing, fatigue, and muscle pain. We're getting hot flushes. I don't remember hot flushes. And we don't have tinnitus, but we are having earache. So is that a change in what's going on? I don't know. But these are the symptoms that they've had reported. We look at the ONS numbers again, and these are out of date, but not as far out of date as the CDC was. I think the CDC is going back and being even slower than ONS, which has just been consistent. But the percentage testing positive is coming down. Hospital admissions are coming down a little bit, but see, that's almost flattened out. And so if our hospital admissions are going to start flattened out, why should the number of cases go down? I mean, the hospitalizations usually lag a little bit, and if they're starting to even out, I would think that we're going to see the infection rate going up. And we're seeing even the ICU and HDU admission rates leveling off. And they are at a fairly low level, but if you can see for all the peaks and whatever, we're keeping the ICU rate fairly constant, regardless of the number of cases that we're getting. Deaths, very flat. They say they're decreasing. They're bouncing around, and again, a lot of times when people are in really bad shape on a ventilator, they can, keep them a little longer. They can pull it a little. I don't know what HUD is either, Doug. I think it's an ICU type of thing, higher care. It's probably not as high as an ICU, I would guess, but I think internet is Google's your friend. Internet will probably tell you right away, but I just view it as an ICU and related. So this is what they're reporting. Notice that the antibody rate has been amazingly flat for a long, long time in the UK. The cases going up, the cases coming down, and antibodies are there consistently. So the infections are not being driven off by whatever the antibodies are. And after someone gets infected, whatever they're testing for antibodies, is it changing? Now, it may be the type of antibodies change, or maybe they have a very low level and people are, if they're testing at 100 and a guy has tests positive at 100 and then he goes to 1,000, he still tests positive, and that would look flat even if his protection went way up or her protection went way up. So again, I don't know what it means, but if this is testing at a level that is anywhere near important for resisting the COVID infection, it's amazing how flat it's been with the infections going up and down over the time. And we have 1 in 36 people reporting long COVID symptoms, and it's coming down a little bit, but just a second, there's a better slide they gave us. They're having this is the same data, but shown in a different way, and they have a little error bar on it. We're seeing the first sustained decrease that we've had from their data starting in April of 2021. There was a slight decrease here and came back up, and it leveled off here. But this is a decrease, a marked decrease coming down. And so if we're assuming, we don't know, so you have to make simplifying assumptions. And assume that the same percentage of people are getting long COVID coming in, and then we have the number coming down here. And if the number of people reporting long COVID is decreasing, it means that we're having people recover at a significant rate based on where our infections are now. And if we go back to where they are in the UK, the infection are now at 100,000 new infections coming in per week, or per day. And so that means that we must be curing significantly more than 100,000 a day, or it wouldn't come down. And up here, when we were getting 300,000 new cases a day, we didn't have a phenomenal jump up. So I think we're having a number of people that are sick and have been sick for a long time and aren't really getting better, and a number of people are getting long COVID, what they're seeing long COVID, and they are getting well. And as the incident rate goes down, we're seeing the number of people with the long COVID diagnosis going down. And so I think that's a very hopeful sign for a number of people that are suffering from long COVID. But again, I don't want to walk away from 3% of their entire population is having long COVID. I don't know of any numbers in the US or any place else, but I have a hard time understanding why it would be significantly different. It might be, but I just don't know why. Now, some people had asked about wastewater, and I have migrated away or stayed away from wastewater. And no. I would never get a job as a politician. If I did, I wouldn't even have the seat warm before they'd fire me for saying or doing something silly. This is the data, and this is the best presentation. Now, the way to look at this is this zone in the middle is plus or minus, they say 9%, it's plus or minus 10%, okay? This, they're saying that the amount of the concentration of coronavirus that they're finding is decreasing anywhere between 100% and 10%. And then the little blue is more than 100% decrease. How you can get more than 100% anyway, maybe they're calculating their numbers funny. Same thing on the other side. This zone here is the increase, 10 to 100% increase, or they say 99. And this is the 100% or more increase. And the number of sites, this isn't right here. The number of sites is for the curve here. This is the number of sites that they have collecting data. And you can see it is changing over time and gradually going up. going up slowly, a little faster, and now a market increase, but somebody got thrown out or something happened there. But the scale, they made it the same on both sides except to 0. So we can see here, if we look at decreasing or not increasing more than 10%, 40% of their wastewater sites are increasing more than 10% and 60% are decreasing more. So this is saying the U.S., as measured by this, the U.S. is decreasing the infection rate. Okay, and we may wonder why they're using these broad numbers and aren't doing anything a little more pointed or whatever. And here's the answer to that. These are the sites they have. First off, the white sites are new sites where they have no data. So those aren't really there. They're just promises for the future. If you look at how many they have in Ohio and Michigan compared to Texas, even California or Florida, Mississippi, this doesn't represent the U.S. It might be an indicator if something's occurring across the U.S., but this wastewater may be very, very important and relevant if you have something in your city or your local area for it. But as far as representing the United States, I just have no confidence that it is, looking at how this data is spread out. And if you look at it, you can see these are the red sites that are increasing in this area. And California has a bunch of decreasing sites. And up in Oregon, we have decreasing sites around Seattle. And so what's really happening across the country, again, it might be a broad indication if something dramatic is occurring, but I don't think it will help very much to understand where we're going or to replace the fact that we're no longer collecting the test results that we were before to try to see what's going on in the U.S. So anyway, we had people that asked about that, and happy to take a look at it, but that's my view of where it is. Now, Zoe had something else new. They have their site, and so I want to give them some credit and spend just a minute on this. They did a whole bunch of blood pressure stuff, and they looked at the diastolic, or the high number, and not the low number, because the high number, Tim Spector said, was more closely associated with heart results, and taking a look at where they are. This is the data that they just got, the broadest view that they've had of real numbers from people randomly selected. And I found a site talking about what the appropriate level was, and you can see it stops at 60. So old guys like me, I guess, don't have blood pressure or have it way high. But this is the numbers that they found. And again, they're going up to, if it's lower than 110, you have an issue. And if it's higher than 145, you have an issue. And most of the data is in that group. But again, their group tended to be older than average, he said, but I don't have a good feel other than that. But I thought you folks might be interested in seeing this data that was collected, and you can sort of see where you are on it or understand how the curve goes and when they've gone from, I think they just redefined the high blood pressure number, bringing it down. And so we have, if it was 180 with this curve, we'd have very few. And if we bring it to 160, suddenly we have a lot more people needing to get high blood pressure medicine or be treated for stuff. And there may be a reason to worry about them, but also it appears someone is increasing their market tremendously by doing that. We had people ask about mortality. And so here's the best representation I found for that. And this is the last slide I have. If we take a look here, the light blue are populations, and this is for the world. Okay, so just overall averages, and this is from the UNICEF data. So the world population coming down here, and the blue is. And some people have said, why are we saying that the world population will increase, but it will only increase to a certain amount and won't go any higher? Well, this curve shows you the answer. Because we have right now the 0 to 4, and we have the 5 to 9. We've reached maximum babies. We're not increasing anymore. And so what happens is if we go look at these older age groups, like this age group, where are all these people? They didn't die. They just never existed, because when they were small, there weren't so many people. And so when they talk about what the world population will do, they're just saying as these people get older, these numbers will come down a little bit when people die, but we basically are just going to fill in the graph. So now that's the world population. But let's talk here about, these are cases, COVID-19 cases, underreported. We know they are, but this, we're taking a look. We have the population here and the number of cases over here. We could change these and get these relative curves higher and lower, and they got them, so they're coming up. They're not saying that there were more than 100% of the people 30 to 34 that got infected. So the curves probably should be smaller, but to allow comparison, they put them in the same relative space, height. And so what this is saying, because here you see if the population, if we have 500 million here and we come over here, this is 22 million infections. So again, that's how far these curves are off. You know, these should be much lower. But to show it, so what we're having here is the percentage-wise, we're having essentially the small children under about 20 that aren't getting the same infection rate as the older folks. But the rest of the folks, it seems fairly proportional to their age. This other curve that's kind of hiding underneath, because these numbers are thankfully very low, this is the death. And you can see as the number of cases comes way down for us older guys and girls, the number of deaths are higher. And why is it 85 to 89 lower? Probably because there aren't as many people there. And why are the 90s way up? Probably because they're very fragile and a much greater proportion died. And did they die because they were in care homes in various states and countries where infections ran or whatever? I'm not going to get into that, but you can make your own conclusion. But I think we can see here that the deaths have gone up much more with the age than what the infections have been. So if we're talking about child mortality that people were asking about, we've got much lower exposure or much lower cases and vastly lower deaths for people that are under, say, 20. And you can draw it higher if you want to, and where you're going to say they cross and have it, have an average, and is that the 60 to 65, 50 to 59, whereas it's probably someplace in here where the percentage catches up, and then older than that, it gets much higher. Whether this is due to age or due to comorbidities, or whether it's due to something else, who knows? So that's what I've got.
Thank you very much for being here. So if you can keep your speaker a little low, I can just do the closing part of it. Although I'm not hearing any echo, so probably you have muted yourself. So that's good. So Cool Bean, thank you very much. Cool Beans, thank you very much. Paul, thank you very much for your help with polio and with the COVID latest. Cool Beans, for a couple of weeks, I've not been doing the chit chats. The reason is, first I was sick, and now I'm trying to get back up for Dr. Bean lectures. Dr. Bean lectures have been falling behind for 2.5 years. I was working on microbiology when pandemic hit, and then we just kept working on COVID. Now it is also important for Dr. Bean members to get more fresh content. So I'm very pleased that this week actually, I've already done 3, and I will do a lecture after this lecture about Clostridium tetani. So I beg your leave for a couple of weeks to catch up on Dr. Bean's side, and then we'll start our chit chats again if you are still there to do chit chats. The other thing is, those lectures are yet not on Dr. Bean's site, that the ones that I've been doing. They have gone to the editor. He would edit them, put some intros, outros, clean up a little bit, and then these would start showing up on the site from the next week. So that is the current
I
situation.
have one other thing I forgot to say if I have a moment.
Go ahead.
Looking at the
No.
looking at the sequencing here that we had before, we've got a number more weeks, and I believe that my prior estimate was right, that the rates are coming flat here, less. We're not getting any more substitutions. We're getting lower substitutions than what their estimate rate is. Going forward, we're getting the same shift upwards and downwards, but the rate of new mutations in each clade is staying relatively flat and parallel. So again, we have more data, but again, it looks like it's confirming exactly what we had said before, that that we're not getting a runaway of infections, and this overall rate, which starts where they've had their first going up to where the average is going to be higher, because we're getting these vertical jumps, and then it continues to go at about 20 substitutions per year, and they're showing 32 and a half. And so it's really more like 20 that's going on. But in one sense, they're right, because if you look at over the long range, they're right. But inside each mutation, it tends to be at about 20. But some of them have a marked more when they get started, or marked fewer mutations. If you remember, we had some delta that, I think it was it delta or beta, that came down from where the prior was, with fewer overall mutations. So that's the last thing I wanted to just mention. That I don't have a slide, but here's the picture of the real live one on nextstrain.com.
So once again, thank you very much.
Scott.
And there are so many cool beans who are thanking you for the presentation. So thank you from me as well. When you do this presentation, you actually give me a break for that day, because I don't have to prepare anything. So I actually prepared the Dr. Bean lecture, which I'm going to do after we hang up here. So at the end, cool beans, have a great night, evening. Like, subscribe, and share. There are some links in the description if you would like to support this work. And there is a special link in there if you would like to get access to Dr. Bean. My team, once again, so they keep protesting that 67 is not the correct price. So today they were saying that, okay, we need to figure out how to improve our pricing. But anyways, there is a link in there. It's a one-time fee. If it was up to me, I would love to give it for free to everyone. But anyways, please like, subscribe, and share. And there are links in the description. Take advantage of them. And thank you, Paul, once again for being here. And Cool Beans, thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.